Welcome to this NPQ Assessment Submission Insight Briefing. My name is Vanessa MacDonald and I am Lead Facilitator for the NPQSL and the NPQML programmes. This is your first recorded assessment briefing and its purpose is to ensure preparation for your NPQ final assessment submission runs smoothly. Full details of NPQ assessment can be found on the Learning Network on Canvas and within the guidance for candidates and sponsors, which you can also find on Canvas. A second assessment recording will be available before your first submission window, and this recording will go into more depth about the submission process, expectations and outcomes from most recent assessment and moderation activity. There is an awful lot of content listed here. I will not be speaking to all of the slides, but will introduce the reason for the group of slides, provide some specific detail as needed, and leave you with the slide deck to act as a point of reference and prompt. The information provided today should be aligned to the full details about the assessment process and practice for final submission, which is found in the assessment guidance, as mentioned before. I have taken the DFE mark scheme and assessment criteria to help direct specific insight into key information needed at the start of your NPQ journey to help guide your thinking and build the foundation into your leadership practice and school project task completion and readiness for a submission. It is really important that you recognise the connection between the 6 content areas. And they are strategy and improvement, teaching and curriculum excellence, leading with impact, working in partnership, managing resources and risks, and increasing capability. And the number of assessment criteria within each area is something that you need to be aware of. When you are working on your leadership project tasks, remember not just to become aware of the assessment criteria, but to also understand where they are derived from in terms of the learn how to and learn about statements. This insight, along with the mark scheme, will provide you with a good foundation on which to build your project and its completion. The overarching purpose of the NPQ qualification has to be about improving your leadership and the behaviours and skills needed to contribute to you being an even better leader than when you applied for the programme qualification. The actual assessment submission is the main vehicle in which you'll be able to celebrate your learning and your development. The final assessment process creates the framework for your celebration and ability to tell and evaluate your development story. From the start of the programme, it is important to plan and track the expectations for assessment submission, beginning with being clear about the submission dates and putting work expectations into context with you, your family, work and NPQ expectations to get you to the point of submission. The project overview and tracker is a critical tool for you to complete to help guide your thoughts and check that the leadership work, acting as your celebration vehicle to capture your leadership, learning and development, is the right school improvement work focus. Taking time to scope each project area and ensuring the overview provides a sound foundation and direction for your final assessment submission is critical to your leadership activity, and you also have support from your online tutor. The overview is to be uploaded onto Canvas for your tutor to check with you about its relevance and potential alignment to assessment criteria. The tracker provides prompts to help focus your leadership activity. Use the tracker to make a record of leadership activity against specific assessment criteria. Gaining an understanding of the criteria, its coverage, and your ability to evaluate and analyse what you have been leading effectively. We recommend you use the project tracker as a capture tool for your leadership work in your project and as a central reference for discussion about your leadership and project progress with your sponsor. I will talk more specifically about the sponsor later, but in this startup stage, it is important you identify a formal time to meet to discuss your project task, your learning progress, and the alignment to assessment criteria. Sponsors will need to verify each phase of your project, as well as provide additional details about your leadership and specific assessment criteria. To be able to do this effectively, they will need to be kept informed and involved in an ongoing dialogue about your project work and your leadership. The project tracker will support this process. This slide provides an overview of the task. Note, really this task, because it's across school, needs to be a strategic and not an operational task. And you need to involve your leadership of this school improvement across the school. There are 3 distinct phases when you're planning for assessment, and that would be the design phase, the implementation phase, and the evaluation phase. You can also see that there are some support materials. They are required supporting documents. They're in the right-hand column, and they are documents that must be uploaded alongside your assessment submission form. There are a number of additional definitions which you can find in the mark scheme. But before we get onto those definitions, I just want you to look at the 6 content areas and their specific assessment criteria. The DFE mark scheme is an additional document, again found within the assessment guidance, along with the glossary of terms, that will support you in looking at the 6 content areas on which the assessment is based. As it says, each assessment criterion can be awarded 0, 1 or 2 marks. There are 14 assessment criteria in the NPQSL qualification. To pass, you must make sure that you do not have a 0 in any of the criterion. Any 0 in any one criterion will mean that you cannot meet the standard, however strong the other criterion may be. I strongly recommend that you use the mark scheme to support your focus when you come to write up your task. In addition, as we mentioned a moment ago, there are a number of terms that are used, and you'll be able to find these in the mark scheme section of the assessment guidance. These are just 5 of them. Feedback from assessment and moderation of project tasks identified that a significant number of candidates did not analyse or evaluate effectively and lost marks due to this. A number of submissions just told a story of what the leader did rather than address the key element of the assessment criteria of why, how, and the implications of their leadership, illustrating this with a rationale and reasoned judgment about leadership activity and how direction and decisions were based. So it's a key document to get hold of, to look at the definitions used by the DFE for some of these key words that appear in the mark scheme and the criteria. These following slides have been designed to show the assessment criterion, the mark scheme score descriptors, and the phase in which you should be writing against those identified criterion. In 1.2.1, you would be evidencing your use of statistical and data analysis concepts. Note the 2-mark score. In this first phase of design, in what way are you identifying the variation in pupil performance? What are they? In what way have you ensured that these are underpinning your project? Really use the criteria mark scheme for the 14 criteria to signpost and scaffold your design, implementation and evaluation of your improvement project task. Be really clear about the terminology used in the criterion and in the mark scheme. It is important you have a clear and coherent picture of the task, its assessment criteria, and how the improvement work will be led with these criteria embedded in it. When you come to write up your 5,000 words, the writing against each of the separate criteria will not necessarily support a very smooth narrative, as each assessment criteria has to be written up separately, and this will impact on overall fluency of the narrative written. One 1.2.2 you can see is written about in the design and implementation phases, and this one identifies that you need to evaluate research into and examples of implementing change. Go back and look at the definition for evaluate and consider the research that you're looking at, and look at the difference between the 1 mark and the 2 mark, and how you are looking at how the research is enabling you to implement that change successfully, but that change is sustained as well. So just be aware of the language used and the difference between the 2 marks. This next slide is about evaluating teaching quality across a school. So what techniques are you using, and what are the differences in the impact of different strategies and interventions? So again, you need to consider the difference between the 1 mark and the 2 mark. Again, look at the definition of evaluate and what is most appropriate in this context. Again, this is design phase, this particular assessment criteria. This is using the language of analyze as opposed to evaluate. So you're looking at leadership and management strategies that have a direct impact on improving pupil progress, attainment and behaviour, and reducing that variation, which is one of those core aspects, those overarching themes of your project. Read the learn how to and learn about descriptors as well associated with this criteria, and as we've said, the definition of analyse. Have you, when you've thought about your plan and your leadership development, have you considered how you analysed different leadership styles and leadership strategies when you were putting that together in the design phase? This one you can see is one of the criterion that actually transcends all 3 phases. So you need to consider what it is that is relevant in design, what then impacts on implementation, and then what is it you are going to evaluate. You might find then using the project tracker for that particular criteria is useful in looking at the prompts that are asked, where the prompts might fit into the different phases to support you in how you break down the write-up into 3 different phases for that one particular criterion. Again, looking at the 2 marks to support you in how you have designed, implemented and evaluated your project. Note the language in the 2 mark around demonstrably. Again, that is a word that you can look the definition up in the glossary in the assessment guidance. Again, this is another criteria that looks at analysing research into examples of curriculum development. You may find that the work you've done online supports you with some research, but you may find that depending on the focus of your project that you are looking at research beyond what you've learned online, and that is very bespoke and specific to your project and how you're developing and growing your school curriculum. Look at the language around the benefits and risks, explaining those fully and why the changes have been made. Please note on this particular criteria, again we have the language around evaluate, but we also have a required supporting document for 3.2.1. This is a sponsor comment. So this is where the sponsor provides a separate document. We also have another one on 4.2.1 in NPQSL. Really encourage them to use the key words of the criterion to guide what they write. Illustrate this with what you have achieved and impacted upon because of your ability to adapt your style of leadership. You might need to provide your sponsor with examples from your leadership work to help them with the write-up. I also strongly recommend that you indicate in your own narrative at least one example where you've evaluated research and applied your findings to how you've motivated and influenced others across the school. So don't rely just on your sponsor comments, you also put some work in around that. This criterion has the communication plan as a required supporting document. Again, look at the language around the 2 marks. So you have to look at benefits and risks of campaigns and techniques used by other schools and how you've looked at those and applied those to your plan. As I mentioned, this is the other criterion that has a sponsor comment. Again, make sure that you are letting your sponsor be fully aware of the language of the criteria, the 2 marks. It would be very sensible for you to have the conversation with them about the how to learn about aspect of this particular criterion as well, and support them in writing up against the implementation and evaluation phase for this specific criterion. This criterion focuses on evaluating the effectiveness of partnerships in terms of pupil progress and attainment. You might want to consider from the outset how you will evaluate these using different methods and techniques, paying attention to the impact on pupil progress and pupil attainment. This one has a business case attached to it. You will find the templates for some of these required supporting documents on the Learning Network, either under the Assessment tab or under the Project tab. You do not have to use the templates that we put forward, but they are there to support you. And in the business case, you do need to analyse the value for money and cost effectiveness of different options. This includes looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of those different options. And it's not sufficient to have a do nothing option and a preferred option. So you need to consider a range of options. Remember that time does have a cost implication, even if it is in a number of hours or days and not a monetary cost, and that doing nothing isn't really an option. This criterion also has an additional required document, which is the risk management plan. Again, there is a template for this, which you can find in the same place as the business case. I would strongly recommend that you download the templates at the beginning of this journey and complete them in draft at the start. Then you can review and refine them as you go through the next 12, 15 to 18 months. And you can keep refining up until the point at which you submit, particularly as your learning increases and you refine what you're doing. As I said, you do not have to download those specific ones, but it would be sensible to have something in hand. There are no set templates for the raw data analysis or the pupil performance data though. This criterion requires that you really do your research and analyse that research into effective professional development and talent management. You might want to draw models that you've had provided in your online course to support your insight and your analysis and evaluation of those different things. In this criteria, you do need to consider how provision may need to change and what factors there are that have a driver about those for that change. Consider what those drivers are. And they might be things such as staff changes, staffing structure change, new initiatives, a whole range of things, but do consider the drivers. We've already looked at this framework and the fact that your submission is in 3 phases. You might want to use the mark scheme to support you with your overview and your planning and your project write-up. The submission form is written in the 3 phases and it identifies which criteria are covered in which of the 3 phases. The mark scheme is aligned to the content areas, as is the project tracker. So the combination of all of those documents will support you in your final submission write-up. This slide deck does as well lend itself to looking at how you map things against the 3 phases and which criteria sit in which phases, and they might act as a prompt as well to support you. I've included here a number of titles submitted in the last round of assessment. The bottom line for your school project is that you will be able to strongly evidence each of the criteria and in what way the project task improves pupil progress and attainment, the variation of it, and improving the efficiency and effectiveness of teaching. Following national moderation, we do have some successful submissions on Canvas that you can look at for different phases, and they will give you an insight into the way in which other candidates have addressed their project and the task. They are examples, they are not exemplars, however, but useful in giving you an indicator as to how other candidates have gone ahead and progressed with their projects. This slide just gives you an indicator of some of the strong characteristics of candidate practice that came out of national moderation, and I would strongly suggest you could use this as a prompt for your own practice, and you could see things like using the assessment guide and the mark scheme, using the criteria as scaffolds across the 3 phases as we've talked about, and making sure that you are aligning the criteria to the expectations. So looking at those keywords around analysis and evaluation, and really looking at how the criteria is aligned to how the criteria is met rather than how the project was run. So really using the language within the criteria to support your write-up. You cannot underestimate the role your sponsor will play in the assessor's decision about your leadership and gaining the qualification. I do hope that you've managed to set up a schedule of formal meetings with your sponsor for the task, and that you will use the project tracker over the year to guide the conversation about you, your leadership, and the application of your leadership track to each of the criterion, as this would be a really good framework to follow. It would support your reflection and your sponsor's understanding and insight into your leadership work and progress. Where appropriate, you could encourage your sponsor to write specific comments aligned to the individual criterion to support your submission, as part of your discussion. And then their recorded comments from each discussion will form the basis for their narrative when you complete your final assessment submission form. Remember, sponsor comments and additional evidence are not included in the word count. Also, do remember that for 3.2.1 and 4.2.1, there are required additional sheets, and it would be great if your sponsor could align those, their commentary, align it to the language and keywords taken from the criterion. This slide gives you the criterion which were identified as the most challenging to candidates. And although there appeared to be quite a lot on there, they weren't dire, they're just the ones that came up having scored slightly less strongly on average. But you can see from the ones we've put up there that the significantly more challenging criterion offer the ones that start with that analyse and evaluate. And that's something that you will really need to consider and address when you write up your submissions, using that glossary of terms to support you in how you're analysing and evaluating those different things. So it is really important that you're clear about the definitions of analysis and evaluation. Analysis is the process of studying the detail, the structure, and the patterns in a range of information or data. Where this includes international research, you are looking closely at what is being said by a range of sources about a particular topic, making sure you can identify the similarities and differences between them, recognizing the part different contexts play in the theory or research being described. Evaluation is the process of judging the importance or value of the sources or research for your particular context or study. How valid is the research? How useful is it to you? How does it impact on your study? Does it give you new insights into your own schools or organisation? How might you use the theory or research in shaping your project? These are the key resources that you can use, and a lot of those you will find on the Learning Network underneath the Assessment tab. Make sure that you download the key things, so the project overview and tracker, the assessment guidance, the assessment submission form, to support you in really planning from the beginning of your journey right through to the end, so that you're building up that key picture of how you're developing in the content areas and in your behaviours as you work through your school project. This slide is really a heads up at this point for the process around submission and submission windows. You can find your submission dates on Canvas, and we do strongly recommend that you aim for the 12 or 15-month submission window, leaving the 18-month window for exceptional circumstances only. The next assessment briefing will be the assessment readiness briefing, and that will be available on Canvas prior to the first submission window. I hope that you will have found this recording a useful prompt to support your preparation and planning, and I look forward to a smooth running year which will culminate in the successful submission of your NPQ project that illustrate very clearly your leadership direction, learning and impact of the NPQ programme and the work you have undertaken in your schools. If you do have any queries arising about the assessment process or practice, please do contact the assessment team. Thank you for listening and enjoy the development stage of your NPQ programme.